Oh, you're back. I'm willing to bet a lot of us these days don't take a moment to appreciate the humble keyboard. This unassuming slab of plastic and circuitry is the ultimate enabler of our digital age. I mean, with just a series of keystrokes, we bring ideas to life, create worlds out of words, and bend technology to our will. And yet, most of us don't think twice about the intricate engineering packed beneath those keycaps. But if you're here, that probably means you're not one of those people. So today we're going to crack open the vault and let the magic out. Beneath this bland, lettered exterior, unless you got one of them cool kid gaming keyboards, there's a world of hidden genius. Tiny mechanical choreographs precisely tuned to interpret our chaotic button mashing into coherent streams of data. I mean, when you think about how much keyboard mashing the average person does, especially if they're a gamer, it's pretty mind-blowing. Ready to learn how some simple components can turn your finger inputs into words on the screen? We'll also discover what gives mechanical keyboards that additive tactile feel and signature clicking sound. So, grab your nearest keyboard, which is probably the one sitting in front of you, unless you're watching this on a phone, and then let's start our tour. On the surface, your basic keyboard doesn't seem all that complicated. It's just a bunch of plastic keys, right? But if you peel off one of them caps, you'll find a surprising amount of ingenious design at work, especially when it comes to the more bare-bones models. Your average bargain bin keyboards actually contain less than 10 truly critical components. That's right, less than 10 essential parts delivering full functionality. Everything else is just keycaps, screws, and an outer shell. It's a beautiful example of lean manufacturing, getting maximum functionality out of minimum materials and cost. No backlighting, media keys, or fancy keycap designs here, but that's not the point. The genius is squeezing so much capability into an affordable package. You could call it the engineering equivalent of a chef making a Michelin star meal out of basic pantry items. So let's crack this bad boy open and see how it's done. In the interior of a basic board is a clever trick, a rubber membrane sheet with little domes under each keycap. It sits sandwiched between two plastic sheets that have conductive wire traces printed on them in a crisscross grid pattern. In the middle is a spacer sheet with holes cut out over each key. The remaining handful of parts are a circuit board, some batteries, and a bracket to hold everything together. Now let's look at how this board actually registers a keystroke. In a grid with 12 rows and 11 columns, each row and column represents a conductive trace on the plastic sheets. The microprocessor runs a 3-volt current along each column while monitoring the rows for any incoming voltage. If, for example, we press the Y key, the current flowing down the 4th column will now have a path to return along the 2nd row, where the key connects the two sheets. And bingo! The microprocessor sees 3 volts on the 2nd row and knows that you pressed the key at the intersection of column 4, row 2, which is Y. Kinda like electronic wizardry, ain't it? Ah, but here's the interesting part. If all columns have 3 volt, how does it differentiate between the keys on the same row? The solution is to rapidly cycle through columns, pulsing the voltage off each one in succession while looking for rows that stop returning a signal. That's how it isolates exactly which key is being pressed at any given moment. It's a clever little multiplexing routine that requires precisely timed voltage pulses just a few microseconds long. And all that is happening under the hood of a humble little $2 keyboard millions of times per second. You know, it almost makes all those fancy gamer keyboards seem like gimmicks. This routine of rapidly pulsing the columns on and off repeats every few milliseconds. So if you hold down multiple keys like T, L, and A, it will catch the voltage drops happening across rows 2 and 6 with the timing matched to columns 5, 3, and 1 respectively. It's a really neat way to minimize power drain while still capturing all those rapidly typed words and commands. Alright, now that we've had a look at the humble bargain bin keyboard, let's take a look at the other end of the spectrum, the premium mechanical boards that can cost $100 or more. Razer. You pop open one of them boys and you'll see a stark difference. A large, rigid, printed circuit board instead of those flimsy membrane sheets. But even that's just scratching the surface. The real McCoy is in the individual key mechanisms. These aren't just boring rubber domes. These are intricately engineered mechanical switches, complete with keycaps, sliders, springs, and metal contact leaves. When you press the key down, the slider pushes one of the metal contacts away from the other. Push farther and the slider moves aside, allowing the two contacts to bang together in a wonderfully tactile and audible click. Release the key, and the spring re-engages the slider, forcing those metal contacts apart again. It's this precise break action that gives mechanical keyboards their addictive, typewriter-like feel and sound. The clever part is having the keycap and stem separate from the slider. This allows a small amount of travel before engaging the click mechanism. Brush a key accidentally and it won't actuate, but commit to the full keystroke and you get that instantly satisfying tactile bump. For a compact hybrid of both rubber dome and mechanical philosophies, look no further than the typical laptop keyboard. These employ a scissor-switch mechanism to blend the crisp feel of mechanical keys with the low-profile requirements of a portable computer. Under each keycap is a sturdy little plastic cross-scissor hinge that interlocks with a second scissor component. As you press the key down, the two scissor sections slide in an X pattern until the rubber dome underneath collapses and makes contact with the circuit membrane below. This gives a subtle tactile bump while still allowing those slim keycap dimensions. You get the best of both worlds with responsiveness and adequate key travel without a ton of bulky individual key mechanisms that take up space. Of course, it ain't quite the same as that glorious mechanical clickety-clack, but it's a nifty compromise that laptop designers and users alike seem to have settled on. Alright, so we went over how the humble letter and number keys transmit their processes in the processor. But what about those other keys that don't produce a visible character? I'm talking about the function keys, arrows, escape, Control-Alt, and that ever-important spacebar. They don't put out any specific characters, but they are utterly vital for interacting with our computers and software. And the methods they use to communicate their actions are just as ingeniously designed. First things first, every key, whether it's A, F9, or page down, has a unique mapping on that row or column matrix. The microprocessor doesn't care if it outputs a letter, number, or system command. It just reports what physical key was pressed or released. It's up to the computer software, the OS, and individual programs to interpret and act upon those key signals accordingly. For instance, when you hit Control-C, the software sees two separate keys being pressed and understands the key combination as a copy instruction. But keys like Shift, Control, or Alt add another layer of complexity. These modifier keys don't directly trigger actions. Rather, they modify the behavior of the next key you press while they're held down. So when you type a capital A, this is what's actually happening. You press the Shift key, which acts as a toggle. You press A while Shift is held. The software registers the Shift modifier state. It outputs a capital A instead of lowercase. Pretty simple, but pretty neat, right? It's basically like the key sending out a hidden code that tweaks how the software interprets the key presses. Then we have those handy-dandy shortcut key combinations like Control-S to save a file, or Alt-Tab to switch between open windows. These are hard-coded instructions that programs listen for and execute accordingly. But rather than burning valuable memory by storing every possible key combination, clever programmers use modifiers and special built-in codes called scan codes to minimize overhead. For example, the Control-S shortcut is just the program detecting a specific scan code sequence like 1D16, which is sent when the combination occurs. It's kind of like those little cheat codes that you used back in the day to get infinite items. Okay, maybe it's not that cool, but it's still cool. And what about those oft-neglected function keys? Originally, these were intended to enable extra functionality in software by reserving certain key combinations. Things like F5 to refresh a web page, or F2 to rename a file. While their purpose has expanded over time, particularly for gaming and productivity apps, the core concept remains the same. Pressing an F key sends a unique signal that compatible programs can interpret as they please. The really cool thing lies in developers innovating creative ways to leverage these relatively limited system keys and modifiers in an ever-expanding vocabulary of commands and shortcuts. Functional coding ingenuity at its finest. Whether you're typing away on a cheap-like-coffee keyboard, to the latest gaming boards that are probably more bragging rights than practicality, there's a surprising amount of engineering artistry under every keycap. It's amazing how many divergent solutions have emerged to accomplish this seemingly simple act of typing out your words and numbers. Who knew the humble computer keyboard could hide such an ingenious world of micromechanics? Next time you hear that iconic keystroke, smile and appreciate the eggheads that made it all possible. If you enjoyed this technical deep dive, be sure to smash that subscribe button and hit the notification bell so you never miss our dives into hidden engineering marvels all around us. And hey, maybe use that keyboard to leave us a comment. Tell us what you learned about keyboards today. Got a favorite brand? Do you prefer gaming or regular keyboards? We'd love to hear it. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.